However, I knew then that the marriage was failing. I desperately wanted to keep my family, but at the same time, I realized I had to prepare for the worst. And the most important thing to me by this time was no other than my child who was in my womb. I could never give up my child. It was just unthinkable. If, if anything happened, my child had to live with me and I had to make sure of it. In an effort to try to find out what was truly in his mind about our marriage and our child, I announced one day that I would abort the child. Of course, I had zero intention to abort my child, and I also knew that no hospital would do an abortion at this stage. I was in the 8th month of my pregnancy already. It was just to find out how much this child or this marriage meant to him. Surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, he agreed. We went to a hospital together only to be told it could not be done at this stage, just as I expected. My child was so quiet in my womb throughout all my pregnancy until this moment. She was so still that I worried something was wrong. But as we arrived at that hospital, she began to kick with a ferocity I'd never felt, stopping only when I promised her she was safe. I didn't know she was a daughter at this stage, by the way. It was prohibited by law in Korea at the time to inform the parents of the gender of a child before he or she was born, because many people chose to abort daughters to have a son. Confirming that he had little attachment to our marriage, I made him sign and seal a written promise that I would have full custody if we divorced. I truly hoped that I wouldn't have to use this, but I would if I had to. Then, again, about a month later from the time we bought the apartment and opened the supermarket, my sister in law came to our place. She was full of anger from the moment she entered into our place, saying, I don't care even if you record this if you want to. Then she started cursing me, calling me a cripple for more than 100 times at least. She yelled at me, what's wrong with calling a cripple a cripple? She poured out her anger onto us for more than an hour. The point of her words was one in the end. We should bring my mother in law back and live with her again. The most shocking thing to me, though, was not what my sister in law did. It was what my husband did, or didn't. My husband sat there in total silence. He didn't defend me. He didn't stop her. He didn't even look at me. I clearly realized that he was no longer on my side in that moment. I didn't say a word to her either, not because I was afraid or I didn't know how to argue back, but because of my child in my womb. I didn't want to become angry while I was carrying a life within me. After she went back, my husband and I took a bus and headed to my hometown right on the next day to bring my mother in law back. What we didn't know was that my body was at its limit by this time. After experiencing a series of events, big events, occurring every month, I was totally exhausted both in my mind and my body. It had been slightly more than a year since we got married, but my mind had never been able to rest ever since our marriage, maybe except for the first 1 or 2 months at best, and my weak body could not bear it anymore. I collapsed and started bleeding as soon as I got off the bus. I could not take one step, literally. My husband, panicking, carried me to the hospital. The doctor told me I could have lost my child, but by God's grace, my child endured. He also made it clear that I needed to take absolute rest from now on. I chose to go to my parents' house, since it was obvious that I would never be able to rest if I went back with my husband and with my mother in law. After seeing me being taken care of my parents, my husband went to his mother who was waiting for him. That was when the truth finally came out. I finally revealed everything that had happened until then to my parents. I knew it would be the end of my marriage, most likely the moment I revealed how my in laws treated me to my parents, since my parents, especially my father, could never tolerate treating his daughter in that way. That's why I've never said a word to a soul until then, and that's why I decided to reveal everything at this point. Besides, they had every right to know what happened to their daughter when they saw her carried in her husband's arms, bleeding, and having almost lost her child. My parents were furious after they learned the truth, just as I anticipated. They concluded now there was little chance that this marriage would survive, and the first thing to be done at this stage was to sell the unit and the supermarket in the city me and my husband were living in and bring me back home. I also agreed, so I went back to our place after a week of good rest to wrap things up. A few days later, my husband came back there as well, only to collect his clothes. Knowing this would be our last meeting, I asked him one last time, can't we just live together somewhere else, away from everyone? I knew it was unlikely, but I asked anyway, since I didn't want to leave any regret on me. I was ready to leave my parents, if only he was ready to leave his family. He answered bitterly, my mother is sitting at the gate. She swore she would disappear forever if I didn't come back to her today. I smiled a bitter smile. What could I say more after hearing that, especially when I knew how much he loved his mother? We partied like that, and that was the last of us as a couple. He went back to his family, and I to my family after selling the apartment and the supermarket. By God's grace, it took less than a month to sell both of them and wrap things up. Next month, in August 1983, I gave birth to my child, a daughter. She met every condition I prayed to God for in my child except one. I prayed for a son, but God gave me a daughter. I had to have cesarean section since my pelvis could not bear giving natural birth. I was also told that this child should be my first and last, since there was a good chance that I might never walk again if I became pregnant one more time. I did not inform my husband about my due date intentionally, since I was worried if my in laws came and took my child, insisting she's theirs. We were still married to each other on paper anyway, and therefore they could do if they decided to. My husband learned about his child being born only after I came back from the hospital to my parents' house. He visited a few times, holding her in silence. There was no word between us. The crack between me and his family could not become any deeper. There was one time one of his relatives tried to mediate between us, but both I and his family were on totally different pages. His family demanded I apologize for being a bad daughter in law. I demanded an apology for their insults. My distrust for my husband, who didn't say a word when I was attacked by his mother and sister, was another factor. It was obvious that he did not protect me, and I was not going to entrust the rest of my life to a man who refused to protect me unless there was some kind of guarantee that this would not happen again. Then came the divorce papers. In Korea, there are two ways to divorce: one, through an agreement of both parties, and two, by one party filing a case with the court. Since there was no way we could agree on each other's terms, my husband's side decided to file a court case. We immediately hired a lawyer and responded. It was a hard and, frankly speaking, dirty fight. Every small mistake or word with no intention to harm from each party was exaggerated as intentional malice and used to attack the other party. Their lawyer painted me as a heartless woman who abandoned her mother in law. Our lawyer painted him as an unfaithful and neglectful husband who was close to another woman. There was a woman who was still single in the group of his friends who used to come to our house every weekend. I was quite sure my husband was not interested in her, but at the same time, it looked like she was still interested in my husband, even though he was now a married man. She was on my nerves, frankly speaking, and our lawyer found this to be a good point to attack. But the real fight was for my daughter. I could not live without my daughter, and my husband's family knew that very well. They knew if they won the case and took my daughter from me, I would have no choice but to crawl back to them. To prevent this, I had to win this case and have custody of my child no matter what. In 1980s Korea, it was almost impossible for a woman with no job to have custody of her child. It was still hard even if the woman had a job. 9 out of 10, the custody was given to the father in case of a divorce through a court case. This was why they started this court fight. They knew the odds were against me. However, my husband's family did not know that I had prepared for this already. I gave his written and sealed promise about the child's custody to our lawyer. Our lawyer guaranteed that this would end the fight the moment he saw it. The night before the court gave its ruling, I had a dream. In my dream, there was Genghis Khan, the founder and the first emperor of Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history. I woke up and told the dream to my mother, and she said in such a confident voice, "We're going to win this today." And indeed, we won. The document I provided turned the table totally. The court took it as evidence that my husband had no attachment to his daughter enough to give up the custody willingly, and therefore ruled that I would have the full custody. We won, just as God showed the night before. That was the last. My short lived marriage ended in pieces. Looking back now, God warned me that this would happen even before I got married. That was the meaning of the dream where I was going into the water alone, probably. I would be left alone in the end. It was a marriage wrong from its start, since it was against what Bible clearly says, and it was a marriage for advantages, not for love. I might have been able to overcome all those obstacles if I was stronger in my faith. But while I received the Holy Spirit and experienced God's amazing grace many times, my faith at that time was not that strong. Yet, God protected me even in the middle of this storm of my life. I was left alone, but I was still in the water of His grace. He never left me even though I was away from Him. He protected my mind and body. He protected my daughter. He even protected the wealth of my family in the many property transfers. We didn't lose a dime in all those contracts. My parents could not protect me. My husband didn't protect me. My God did.